Welcome to our Solutionology podcast. Today we've got a great guest, Bud Runquist, who's the VP of Sales and Marketing with Stratasys Direct.
And we're going to go on a journey where we're talking about how Stratasys Direct led network distributed production for one of their clients, and how this should become more mainstream and what we're going to experience maybe in the coming years.
But it wasn't just a casual journey, as you'll hear. This was an emergency response to a natural disaster that occurred in the United States, and it impacted a major component of a supply chain for one of the top automotive manufacturers. It represents a blueprint that should and can be used for many other applications, not just for emergency responses, but also supply chain augmentation and other applications. He doesn't like when I say this, but I'm going to say it. We've got a celebrity guest today. I'm sorry, Bud, but we've got Bud Runquist, who's the VP of Sales and Marketing with Stratasys Direct Manufacturing. Stratasys Direct provides additive manufacturing services, so real similar to DI Labs. A competitor to us, but we see Stratasys Direct more as a business relationship, and we're going to talk more about that. But the topic is about a critical supply chain breakdown that Stratasys Direct experienced with a client of theirs last year in 2024 as a result of a hurricane, basically. And before we get further into the story, I want to share a little bit about Bud. Bud, you've been at Stratasys now for 6 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. 6 years now. Yep.
You've been in several leadership roles, of course, starting on the sales and client side of the business. You're leading that aspect of the business today, but it's been really cool to see from an outsider looking at it, your history and experience there. You've had a significant impact on the organization.
It's been an awesome journey, that's for sure. I wake up every day thinking additive now, and you hopefully can see by the smile on my face. I love it.
It is obvious by the look on your face, and it was obvious when I first talked to you. That was one of the things that I really resonated with me, and where you started to get that celebrityism in my mind is just how you approached additive. And I'm really looking forward to having you share more of your insights as we dig into this discussion. And we can jump right into it. This situation that came up in October of last year, where one of the hurricanes took out a portion of the injection molding supply chain for a major automotive manufacturer. And I'd love to hear, Bud, you were on the front line. What happened with this?
Yeah, it was really unfortunate. We had that hurricane come through, and a customer of ours we had worked with in prototyping and some low volume production actually called up our sales rep and said, hey, we've got a situation here where we're going to be lying down. We're talking about a large OEM where lying down means millions of dollars a day that it's going to cost them. And so they were scrounging for any alternative that they could from their injection molding and said, is this even possible? And I give credit to the sales rep because he had an open mind and was like, okay, we can solve this. I know we can solve this. And so we first looked at the parts and said, okay, what is going to be the best technology? You know, what is the material that's going to be able to fulfill this application? And is it really even possible at scale? That day we had parts on a printer and started printing parts. And by the end of that 12-hour day, we had parts in hand and shipped them to the customer and said, we think this is the solution, but we want you to test this before we continue our discussion at all. And they came back the next morning, had tested it overnight and said, this is something that will work. How quickly can you scale up? And so that's when we thought we've got to start reaching out to partners in the industry and say, is this something you can help support? The demand is going to come fast. It's going to be furious. And we had a hard deadline of producing. They wanted 500 parts per day, and they wanted their first shipment in 7 days. Actually, one of the first calls we made was to DI Labs. And I give credit to you too, and commend what you guys have going on there, because we were looking at who is somebody we can trust to come alongside us in this project. The way that you guys operate and the way you think about additive, quality wasn't going to be a concern. We knew that you would probably look at it and help us out too, in seeing if there's any challenges maybe in what we've put together. and thinking about it from a partner perspective. And so, from there, we started reaching out to other partners and trying to find capacity and getting commitments of who could join us in this effort, and was very surprised at how many people said, yeah, I'm in. Yeah, let's do this. It created a lot of excitement. And I think what people recognize is this could be a true win for our industry. Like if we came together and solved this, that it wasn't about Stratasys, it wasn't about DI Labs, it wasn't about even just that customer. It was what's happening in this situation and how can additive come in and fill that gap and prove that volume production of end use parts is absolutely possible. And within a time frame that ain't the traditional manufacturing in this case. And so it's exciting to see that we're able to come together and actually do that.
It's absolutely remarkable.
I love to hear that the first thing you did was let's get the parts in the machines and let's get this thing validated. If we're talking about scale, let's make sure we have what we need. Is there a time since you've been at Stratasys where your learning lessons have provided you the insight to react so quickly in that way?
This isn't the first time that we've had a customer come to us with this scale. It was the first time we had a customer come to us this scale and said, we need it in 7 days. That was the challenge, right? We looked at it and thought, how could you even produce it in that amount of time? And you have to use that network. I said, we have had other situations, and right away you're looking at, well, what is the technology and how can you fulfill this based on the technology and that material? And is that possible in that lead time? And I think that's one of the critical components that we had in this, was that the lead time was so important that it was lying down, right? And timing was everything, speed was everything, and cost was like, it's got to get done, So in the moment, it was like cost wasn't as important. But I think one of the learning lessons too for the customer was that they recognized that additive is a stopgap and was a cost-effective solution in this stopgap, right? Because alternative was 100x what the cost would have been. So not always when customers have come to us with large-scale projects are they thinking that way. And in this case, they were. However, we are seeing more and more customers that are thinking about low to mid volume for additive manufacturing production, because they're recognizing the quality is there, the repeatability is there, and they're gaining confidence in what additive can do when players in the industry are thinking about certified, validated processes and qualifying those projects before they're saying, yep, we can do this.
And I think your reaction plays right into what we need to do for the industry to ensure that we're doing, we're providing successful results to clients as an additive industry. We need to be able to respond in the sort of way that you did successfully, because we need to build that confidence up. That's how the industry becomes more adopted in these sorts of scenarios.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. More and more of these use cases that can be successful outcomes of production work, we need to highlight those. We need to get the word out that it is possible. I would say not every additive manufacturing can do that today, right? I think there is still a lot of challenges out there around quality and controlling quality and having the knowledge to be able to move into production. And so I think when we do have these opportunities, we have to partner to highlight that. And that's one of the things I was excited about today in joining this. We get to share what we're capable of, and that these are real results. This is real life, and it's definitely possible.
And it can be achieved successfully with the approach that you took. We're not talking about prototyping anymore. We're talking about a manufacturing method. And if these parts were prototyped, you might just produce one and send it off. But the fact that you went into that validation process, obvious that your organization is focused on manufacturing at scale, because that was the approach that you took as a natural instinct, rather than a response to doing it wrong the first time.
there's also was kind of a validation process in those partners, right? Like we can validate that part, but who are the partners that we're going to bring in and how are they conducting their business? What is your process? Help us understand. Is that a quick inspection? Are you doing a 6-point? What does that look like for you to ensure that the builds are matching what the expectations are? And there were, I'll just be honest, there were a couple suppliers that we said, sorry, we're not, for what you said, we're not confident that you're going to be able to partner with us, and or the quantity was just too little because we needed capacity and quick broad capacity in all of this. So I think the industry needs some standards around that, right? I think that's an area that's missing today, is that we need to be discussing some standards when it comes to certified processes and quality of work and output of work. So yeah, I'd love to know if you guys have any comment on that and how you're managing that, thoughts on it.
Well, it's interesting you say standards, because it feels like that was an aha moment for you as you're like expanding this out and talking to others. It's to realize that as you travel down that journey the first few times to get distributed manufacturing, what sort of boxes should we be checking in order for this to be successful? And they're absolutely having standards that can be mapped and followed throughout the industry for occasions like this seem critical, so that we can join arms when the time is right and support these initiatives.
It's been something I smiled because I can't agree with you more. The confidence that you placed in the network, most of which you hadn't worked with before. And it's something that we struggle with when we have opportunities that are beyond our capacity, where we really struggle with outsourcing work, because 9 times out of 10 in the past we've had unfortunate situations. And we've worked with Stratasys Direct. You all have done some work for us, which we're appreciative of, and it's clear to us that you're also operating at a very high level. But that's not the norm, because our industry has come from a traditional prototyping base, and those expectations and standards are quite different from repeatable scaled production. So it's something that we need.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I was thinking about the standards of it, and we at Stratasys Direct do have a quality team. We have a director of quality, and so she sets a lot of the standards that we have and ensures that quality is kept number one. And then I think too, one of the critical things is our fulfillment team. And certainly in this opportunity, we put a lot of the weight on our fulfillment team in making sure that they were getting the resources that they needed. But at the same time, they were the ones that were doing a lot of the qualification of these partners and the communication with the partners around, something like this. We had a lot of these partners that weren't even set up as vendors, right? So we had to get the vendors set up. Starting from scratch, and then managing the number of parts coming in and coming out. So it gave us a glimpse into what a full-scale distributed manufacturing project or opportunity would look like with the demands of time, right? And so there was a lot of learnings that we got as well in our fulfillment team that they brought back and said, hey, here are some of the things that we recommend doing into the future so that we're set up for success if opportunities like this come again. Hopefully there's a natural disaster that causes that, but we intend to continue to grow in distributed manufacturing. This was a key opportunity for Additive to shine a light into what we could do, and that went all the way to the top. And they came back to us and said, awesome work, right? Like, this is amazing that you're able to pull this off, to do this. And it definitely opened their eyes to the possibility of Additive in the future. And so I look at that and I was like, what a great opportunity to get that recognition all the way to the top. And I thinking about, how do we continue to impact that level to see that we are at a point now where additive manufacturing can produce in production volume with the standards that we're setting.
Making sure that when the occasions rise, that we're doing the right thing, so that that's a successful report and not a negative report. And that's the thing that's most critical. Because if your team didn't follow the right process and carry the steps out and be dynamic through the production, it may not have been that successful, and that response up the chain could have been very negative. So kudos to your team for taking such great care and being so precise in your execution.
Yeah, thanks for that.
It's a great loop back to the standards conversation and some of the conversations I love when we're out talking to new prospects. Additive manufacturing, but that's prototyping, right? You all can't do production. And then you get to have that conversation of, well, actually, production's can be pretty common. And for us, actually, most of what we do is production. So we love having those conversations. But every once in a while, you get that conversation of, I've tried additive in the past, and it's like all the parts were different, or one order was good, the next order was bad. And I hate those conversations because, if there was one call that I had to our industry, is to make sure to set clear expectations with customers. Sometimes price, because additive is more expensive, price can be a leverage that the market uses to drive down the way things are done with additive manufacturers. And in some cases that's great. Least cost in some applications is critical, but making sure that those expectations are clear and the rest of us are operating at similar standards for the higher quality applications. Because when one of us drops the ball, that may end their journey for the foreseeable future in adopting additive. So in my mind, that's one of the reasons that you and Stratasys Direct is a celebrity, because you are upholding those standards and helping float the expectations for the industry at the level that they ought to be for production.
Yeah, it's a great comment. I think, that prototyping world is so critical, right? It's still, and it always will be, a component of additive manufacturing. I think we've seen a lot of small companies, startups coming into that prototyping world, right? It's become available. It's a lot easier to get a hobbyist printer and produce good prototypes today. I think that's fantastic because it opens up the minds of those engineers and the possibilities, which is great. But I think there is some confusion in a gray line of where does that go from prototyping for, form, fit, function to true volume production, right? And it's a totally different thing. They're drastically different. And I think there are some blurred lines in the marketplace with that right now. And I think it is unfortunate. We do see in our market in some areas where there's kind of a race to the bottom, that low price, right? I think it can be really frustrating to see and to feel. And I think that's natural in a lot of industries where you get a lot of people entering that market and trying to survive and trying to make their name, and continuing the conversation around production is one of the key aspects we need to have to really validate where this industry is going. Right? We need to continue to prove that we can do these applications and uncover new use cases and push the limits of production, and at the same time still be supporting the prototyping industry. One of the things I was going to mention to you, the way we think recently around additive, there's a great book by Jeffrey Moore called Crossing the Chasm. I don't know if you've read it. If you haven't, I'd highly recommend it. It's a book I read when I was in college many years ago. But the topic we're looking at in there is his point around the technology life cycle and looking at individuals and where they're at in that. And so the beginning of his graph, you have the visionaries and the early adopters. And I think in this industry, we've seen a lot of that within the prototyping world. Right? Visionaries and early adopters tend to have big budgets, and it's okay for them to spend money and not see immediate results. And so we see that in the printer world. We sell printers and somebody has a great idea and they're excited because they got the funds to do it, and they start producing prototypes and they iterate, and they're pushing the limits of what they think is possible, which is great. We have to have that. But then what exists is this chasm that we're trying to cross right now into the pragmatists and the conservative, which is the mainstream market. They make up the biggest section of the market, and that is the production market for the AEM industry, right? We need to find these manufacturers that are out there that are a little more conservative. And I believe parts manufacturing is critical to helping these customers cross that chasm. Because as a visionary, again, you've got a big budget, you iterate, you go quick. As a conservative, it's all about making these little incremental improvements in your bottom line. And now you're asking somebody that's always looking at their bottom line to make a change. And that's hard to do. And so I think parts plays a huge role into that. And then we see it as, if we can help them through parts to cross that chasm, they're likely to then invest in a printer and bring that in-house. And when that happens, we see those customers come back and say, I need a different material for this other application. Can you print these parts for me? And so it starts this ecosystem of, printer parts and more technologies. And then they buy another printer and bring it in-house. And it opens up this world that they didn't know existed within additive, and really taps into new use cases. So I think that's one of the things our industry needs to look at is, how do we ensure that we're helping those conservatives and pragmatists cross that chasm and gain confidence? And I think it's through the work that you guys are doing and we're doing to ensure that we uphold those quality standards and give them confidence in that.
What a great way to characterize the, I'll call it a lull that I think a lot of us have felt in the industry for the past couple of years, post-pandemic, where there was a lot of peakiness going on, and then that curve changed where there's still growth, but it's not occurring at the same rate. We're in that phase where we're crossing the chasm. And I'm interested in your thoughts, because as I hear you talk and we get into this pragmatism spectrum, some of the applications that we see being driven or accepted by pragmatists are direct swaps, where we have a traditional. We've always used a traditional method, and now we're thinking about an alternative method.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges that we faced is getting those conservative or pragmatist folks thinking about transformational change, because we're using a manufacturing technology that doesn't have the same constraints that some of the traditional methods do. We're unencumbered by some of those constraints, so that we can start to think about things differently. But then you think about the workflow to get to that place. It requires different design thinking. It requires different validation methods, and I wonder if we're not seeing, or we won't see, an extended chasm, because not only are we working with the pragmatists, but we're also working with this shift that has to occur upstream from them, that's in the design and all of those. What are your thoughts on all that?
It's a great topic. So I'll share a situation that we're working through right now, where a large OEM is considering their additive manufacturing processes and what does that look like. And they brought hobbyist printers in-house. They are a manufacturer. They gave hobbyist printers to several of their manufacturing sites and said, play with these. Let's see what kind of parts you can produce from the machinery that we're running. And they came up within 1 year, 140 SKUs of parts that we're replacing in a manufacturing floor. This is automated equipment. These are wear and tear parts. And they now are saying, what is going to be our additive strategy for moving from this hobbyist era to now an industrial manufacturing? We want to look at industrial manufacturing grade 3D printers. And at the same time, they know the importance of the spare parts business from the equipment that they're running. They're not the manufacturer of that equipment, but they have a great relationship with the manufacturers of that equipment. And so now they're going to them, and we're seeing it flow down from the large OEM to the supplier of that equipment to the OEM. And they're saying, hey, what is your additive plan? Right? Because today you're CNCing those parts or injection molding those parts or, using traditional methods. What are you doing to consider how additive can impact what you're doing? Because we're seeing it in our manufacturing plant, and we want to encourage you to do that because we believe it's the future of where this is going.
That doesn't bring tears to your eyes. And skipping your step, I don't know what would. Well, I think from our standpoint, we continue to see positive momentum, and the rate of change is the question. And hopefully we can see an increased rate of change as we continue on. But success stories like what you've shared with us today, which I'm very grateful for, is a testament to that rate of change increasing, even if from unfortunate outside influences. But it is a positive sign, and that will, I'm sure, if it hasn't already, lend itself to additional increases of rate of change with that customer of yours, and I hope it does for you all. And I'm very optimistic about what the short-term future holds for AM.
Yeah, so are we, absolutely. I think we're at the tipping point for additive, and it's going to be exciting to see what happens over the next 5 years. I think it's really going to accelerate.
You've got some brilliant people at Stratasys. You're leaders in the space, both on the service side, producing parts, as well as on the equipment side. And greatly appreciate the time that you've taken with us today to share your story, your insights, and your perspective. Are there any final thoughts that you want to leave folks with that are aha moments, perhaps?
I think an aha moment for me at just recent is this thought around distributed manufacturing for additive is very possible, and we're very close to having, I would say, confidence in the systems, but more importantly, confident in the people and the engineers and the design and the MES and PLM systems that will make this possible. I am excited to see how AI is also going to impact our industry, and there's just daily articles around that when you think about ensuring part quality and looking at digital files out there and creating digital twins so that we can have catalogs of parts that can be purchased and seamlessly being able to create parts around the world. I think it's really exciting to see where this is going. And I'm hearing about companies every day that are coming out with just fantastic ideas that I think are going to really help out our industry holistically. And you guys are leading the way in thought leadership in what you're doing here with this podcast. And I love the approach that you take. You're not selling a service or a product, you're selling a solution. And when I say selling it, you're coming alongside your customers and working with them. I could see from idea to, iteration to saying, no, we can produce this in production and in volume for you. And we learn a lot from you guys too, just so you know. We're watching and seeing what you're doing, and you're a tremendous advocate for additive, and definitely look forward to partnering with you all in the future.
Thank you for that. That's a major compliment. Thank you, Bud.
Thanks for all you do for the industry, and for certainly having this conversation with us today and sharing your insights. Extraordinarily valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's been an honor. I appreciate the invitation, and truly it's an honor to be able to work alongside you guys and see what you're doing. So thank you. I'm humbled by the opportunity to be here with you guys today.